we are waiting for the breakthrough. We are waiting for a clean energy that is not only clean and environmentally friendly and sustainable, but it's also cheaper for people to afford. You want to make sure that when you are able to provide a solution, it's an inclusive solution that targets all issues from the root causes. You don't want to create a new issue by solving a current issue.
Welcome to the Do Youth Podcast, a platform that we use to engage, listen, and educate ourselves. My name is Khamis Alblooshi. I'll be your host today, and I'm here with a material scientist and energy engineer, Mohammed Essa, who will be engaging with us today about sustainability and also give us a little bit more understanding on COP28. Mohammed, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you for being with us. So the reason we're here today is just to talk and discuss sustainability in general. But I think before we move forward, maybe we should talk a little bit about you, Mohammed. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a person who heard of the term sustainability. It's a major agenda item, and I want to be educated on the topic. And inshallah, by the end of this, I'll be educated enough to know what's going on around the sustainability and maybe give us a little bit of information about the COP28. Before we start this, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and your scientific background specifically, and the energy and the material side of business? So who is Mohammed the scientist?
Mohammed the scientist. Very flattered to hear that. So for me, I started off as a chemical engineer in my first year until I made the shift to material sciences and engineering in the energy stream, so with a focus of energy. And that only came as a product of my interest and my deep love for sciences, and particularly when it came to energy as well as industrial growth. I did my education in the University of Sheffield, and that choice came as a result from this university's name being cited multiple times in one of the researches that I had to do for the modeled United Nations. And this has launched me to be who I am today, which is a youth climate delegate, part of Her Excellency's Youth Climate Champion Team, Sham Al-Mazroui.
Right, this is great. We were catching up actually before the recording, and you were telling me that you've started, this passion started way before the university time, way before the whole hype about sustainability came in. What triggered it? Why did that call come to you?
Well, it's kind of sad when you think of it this way, because sustainability shouldn't have been a buzzword. It's something really catchy or trendy. It's not a trend that will fade, but it's more of a lifestyle for us to live. So to do that, we really need to understand the core or the essence of sustainability. And by definition, sustainability is not strictly environmental. Sustainability could be with your source of income as well as your behavior. So to make it simpler, I would usually break it down into 3 elements. And once it ticks all these 3 elements, then it is sustainable. So this starts off with the fact it's consistent, reliable, and steady. Meaning we can easily access it, and it's always there, and we do not have the fear of it running out. As well as, it's steady. It does not fluctuate. It's not reliable. It's always reliable. And this can apply to a series of things, not just environment. It can apply as well to your salary, your income, your work, and your lifestyle as well.
See, this is interesting because when we talk about sustainability, directly what comes to my head, recycling,
right?
Driving EV cars. It's all environmentally related, reducing carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. But now that you're mentioning it, it's a little bit more general. It's more of a way of doing things, not a specific task. It's a lifestyle. That's very interesting. Now, when we talk about it in general, And I think this was where your direction is. Yeah, you've been involved
Mm.
with Masdar and in
Mm.
part of the youth
Y4S, yeah.
Y4S. Can you just tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about this?
So Y4S is a Youth for Sustainability. So it's a program where you get skill up, not just with your environmental
Mm.
knowledge or your sustainable practices, but it's also a skill up program to really enhance and enable the youth of today to become future leaders that will operate in a very sustainable matter. And I was very happy to engage with people with similar minds. And we discussed multiple concerns that we had, such as how can we convince people? How can we uh, result in a change in the community that we live in? And how can we be impactful with our actions? So this was the program that I engaged with Masdar, and I'm very grateful for the whole experience that was provided to me. And it was one of those programs that I thought I was very well looked after.
It's so one of the most important things that you've mentioned here is how to engage and
Mm,
convince people.
mm,
Uh,
mm,
I think this is where the trick is,
mm,
because why should someone, let's assume like me,
mm-hmm,
care about how much is carbon footprint is being produced? Because correct me if I'm wrong, the effect of climate change takes time to take place.
mm-hmm.
I may not feel it. Younger generation, my kids will not feel it. Grandkids maybe feel it a little bit, and maybe why don't they worry about it? Why do I have to worry about it now?
Well, you see, the thing is, another buzzword that is a product due to climate fear or climate change panic slash fear
Mm-hmm.
is GMOs. So, to define a GMO, it is the genetically modified organism. You might find it in coffee shops, you might find it in snacks, you might find it in bread, so on, so forth. And why? Why is that particularly a thing that we should be concerned about? Because plants are being modified to be more climate resilient. They're genetically being modified to resist the changes in temperature. Because, fruits and vegetables are very temperature sensitive, right? What happens when you make, for example, the place that dates grow in much colder, the dates won't grow, right? But if you make them or you genetically modify them to be more resilient to the climate change, then that's when you make more profit, right? You have less risk of your trees not giving produce. You have them have more longevity. But this is a concern because a lot of people don't really want to eat genetically modified
Yeah.
organisms
Mm.
because we're not so sure about the long term harms of GMOs.
I'll be honest with you, it's here from our side and my family. They,
Mhm.
they don't buy GMO
Yeah,
chickens because they're the size of turkeys. Like they're this big.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
insane,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it doesn't look normal.
It
And
doesn't.
I think what the people think is that they've been modified so you can get more profit. Yeah, the
Yeah,
heavier the
yeah, yeah,
chicken, the
yeah,
more you pay.
yeah. I mean,
And now you're telling me this is actually was kind of, or at least it will be inevitable if we continue
mhm,
doing things the same way we are.
mhm, mhm. I mean, if the climate is not suitable for chickens to live, what will happen to the chickens? They'll die, right? And
That's why they inject them with steroids.
I'm not sure if steroids is the right term, but they do definitely modify them to be able for them to withstand
Mm.
those increased or lower temperatures, not necessarily increased, because as we're aware, climate change means sometimes that the weather is colder when it's meant to be cold and hotter when it's supposed to be hot. And you have that very fluctuating weather when you have suddenly have sandstorms, you suddenly have rain when it's not supposed to rain, and you have typhoons and so on and so forth.
So you're talking about the environmental aspect of it now,
Yeah.
which kind of links to it's part of the sustainability, because if we don't have a stable environment, it's not sustainable. We won't be
Mm,
able to have a sustainable lifestyle,
mm.
sustainable food sources, sustainable energy sources,
Mm-hmm,
and so on and
mm-hmm,
so forth.
mm-hmm.
Now, the UAE government have done a lot of work on the sustainability over the past few
For sure.
years. And can you tell us a little bit about the efforts of COP28?
Mm-hmm,
Why are we hosting it here? How relevant are we in this conversation on a global scale?
mm-hmm,
Because I believe that, and I've been and we've had this talk before. So I've worked in countries. I worked in Europe. I worked in the United States for some time, and I've I feel that there is some kind of push on it, but it's not as strong as here. So why are we caring more than these gigantic powers?
Well, let me start with two aspects. The first one being negative. And it shames me to say this, but despite our low overall emissions, because we're a very small country, when you take it on the scale of emissions per capita, so carbon emissions per capita, we're among the fourth highest around the world.
Really?
And yeah,
So it's just so I believe China is going to be up there.
well, to your surprise, the top four are all Gulf countries.
No way.
Yeah. So, overall, you would think India would have a higher.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
India, China, you know where the factories are. This is what makes sense. I don't
Yeah.
think a car does as much pollution as this a factory that is built in the United States or China.
But then again, that's not the way you measure it. So you measure it on average, so global emissions per capita, right? When you have a
Smaller
smaller
country.
country
Mm.
and that is very densely populated and it's very condensed and everyone drives their own vehicles, people are not using public transport, and you have ACs working throughout the day and night as well, you're definitely bound to have a higher carbon emission. But that is not to say that the UAE has not put it its priority to lower its carbon emissions, but not just in the UAE, but the whole world. So what the UAE is trying to achieve by hosting this COP is to gather the world, right? And try to reach a change, or at least change the mindset of climate change being a race, and instead shifting the thought of it being a marathon, right? There is no winners and losers in climate change. If climate change does take place and we're affected, then we're all losers. But that's not the way the UAE thinks of it. The UAE thinks of it as it's a marathon where no one gets left behind, which is why the UAE has preserved no efforts in making this a COP of inclusivity, a COP of action, and also the COP of possibilities.
For people who don't know what COP is, can you just tell us what does COP stand for?
Yes.
How
COP.
old is it? How long has it been going on? And is it where has it been hosted like before? And some information, like a little bit of background.
So the previous COP was in Sharm el Sheikh. So COP 27 was
Okay.
hosted in Sharm el Sheikh, not too far from here.
That's a lovely area too.
It is. And as the name suggests, COP 28 has been running for 28 years. Some of the most important and life-changing decisions or agreements have been signed during
the Paris
COP.
Agreement, for
The
example.
Paris Agreement. So in 2015, the world has agreed to sign the Paris Agreement, right? Where the main objective is to limit global warming to not exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, this is a very important COP because this is where the global stocktake, or the GST, is going to be introduced. And this will help us pinpoint where exactly we are in accordance to the Paris Agreement.
Global stock sounds financial.
Global stocktake, right? It is just to make people, or for people to know, it is just how to make countries understand where they are when it comes to their direction towards achieving the outcomes of the Paris Agreement.
It's like a list of objectives or something?
I mean, think of it this way. An easy way to put it is, think of it as, you leave work and you're about to head home, right? And you slightly get distracted. You say, for example, I'll hit the grocery, or maybe I'll pass by a specific place, and then somewhat you realize that, oh, I'm actually not sure how to get home now. So what do? You open Google Maps or Waze or any navigation platform that will help you navigate to your intended destination, which is your home, right? So the global stocktake serves somehow to act as this navigation. So it really tells you where we are right now and how we can achieve or reach the goals before it's too late. Because if things stay the same things as they are, then we're bound to overshoot to a 2.8 degrees Celsius. And this is not to cause a climate change panic or fear, but it's just showing that, okay, we're doing good, but not good enough, right?
So it's 2 degrees. I mean, temperature outside goes up and down 2 degrees much. You don't really feel it that much. Why specifically 2 degrees? And how how much will 2 degrees really affect you? If you don't mind me asking.
Of course. So this is a really good question. So the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius is a limit, right? It's just to make sure it does not exceed that.
Are we all gonna drown if it exceeds?
Well,
Like
it's
tsunami?
not, you're not gonna particularly drown, but what you should be concerned about is the organisms or the ecosystems that will be affected by organisms not being able to survive that change, right? There's just so much you can do to the environment, which is why you want to make sure you do not exceed that 1.5 degrees Celsius so the ecosystems do not get affected. Organisms might start to die out because they cannot resist the change in temperatures. Plants might not be able to grow. And it's just the fact that everything is reliant on each other. There's like a sort of food chain, there's an interlink between different species, and you want to make sure for the countries to maintain their biodiversities, they cannot exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius because that affects us on multiple scales. One example is the change of the migration route of the falcons. So they no longer cross the sea to reach the UAE as one of the migration points. And that has affected one of our most important pillars of the heritage and culture, which is falconry. So this is why this number has been set based on studies and research and, feasibility in a sense. Ideally, we do not want to change. So it's not like we want to reach that 1.5. No, ideally, we want to be less. But it's based on feasibility and how achievable 1.5 degrees Celsius is the minimum we should aim for, or like the maximum change we should aim for.
Right. So again, just to stay on the same topic here, the Paris Agreement, I think, has a lot of elements when it comes to limiting the carbon footprint, etc., etc. And I mean, the carbon footprint is not equal across the board, yeah?
Yep.
I mean, countries who have more factories, who have more transport, would have definitely a higher carbon footprint. Routes, we were talking about airlines earlier, so airlines who routes or have much heavier traffic above them, who would have a higher carbon footprint. So, how much change really can happen from let's say the bottom 200 countries, if the top 5 don't change that much?
Well, you see, sorry, allow me to trace back to your previous question. And when we talk about significant moments of COP, so the conference of parties, and we have to highlight one of the most important outcomes of COP27 that was hosted in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh specifically.
Yes.
It was the loss and damage funds. I mean,
The
let's think about it. Yeah, the loss and damage fund allocation. So why is this important? Bear with me a second. So when we talk about some of these least carbon emitting countries, we're talking about least developed countries that cannot even build a factory to begin with, right? And perhaps they have the least carbon per capita.
Exactly. So
right?
That's the point, yeah.
But is it fair that they're the most impacted when it comes to climate change?
Absolutely not.
No.
I see where you're coming from. Yes.
Yeah. So this is why the loss and damage funds allocation is really important, right? Because these countries have not contributed towards climate change. However, they're the most impacted.
So droughts
that affect their crops, which they rely on, because they rely so much on their sort of economy relies so much on fruits exporting, coffee beans.
Agriculture is kind of a big thing, and agriculture has been hit the most.
Yeah. And when it's being hit by typhoons, droughts, floods, uncontrolled weather conditions, then their economy is definitely taking a hit due to climate change, despite them not really.
True. And even the countries that they export to, yeah. So many countries rely on importing food, especially
coffee beans, for example.
And many tropical fruits and foods. So you're right. It's kind of, even though it affects these guys the most, however, the impact is much more global because the bigger you are, the more supply you need, and you have much more reliance on these kind of countries for exporting the food. Um, so just to revert back to the COP28 bit,
Mm-hmm.
how does this COP28 differs from the previous one? And also maybe a little bit we want to touch on the youth
Youth climate
climate delegates
delegation. Yeah, yeah.
delegation. So
Well, for this COP to be different, we need to let's both agree on one thing here, right? If you do the same thing over and over, you're only bound to get the same thing, right?
it's definition of madness, doing the same thing,
Yeah, yeah,
expecting a
yeah,
different result.
for sure. So this is why this COP decides to do things a bit differently. This year, the UAE has appointed the first youth climate champion. And this is to signify the role of youth in the change. And this is merely or just simply one of the many things that the UAE believes in order for this COP to be a success. So, why is this youth climate champion very important, right? It plays a major role in tackling the missing link between policymakers and high level decision makers and the youth. And it's also to mainstream involvement of youth throughout the COP. And it's not just them being included for the sake of inclusion, but them being proactively engaged with, for them to contribute significantly and make a change. And this is how, or we fall down under the category of Her Excellency's team, the YCC team or the Youth Climate Champion team, as delegates. And mainly, one of the things that we do is we engage with both local and non local youth that really want to contribute or they want to be involved in COP28. So, aside from the 10 local youth climate delegates, there is also 100 international youth climate delegate. And mind you, it's really interesting to know that these 100 delegates, 70% of them are from small developing islands, so SIDS, least developed countries, and indigenous people. Because these people don't get their voices heard that much. So for us to make a change, then these people need to be involved. And one of the things that we were able to engage in as youth, so for the first time, there was a mega event called the Petersburg Climate Dialogue. It's a high level event where decision makers from around the world, specifically 40 constituencies, have gathered in Berlin to discuss, or let's say, first draft their expectations from COP, where do they see this COP going, and engage in 3 different workshops. And for the first time, I am very happy and proud to say that we're not just the first Emiratis, but we're the first youth from around the world to be involved in this conference.
You know, it's a bit surprising because when you talk about sustainability, it's a very future term. Yeah, sustainability affects the climate change, which is a future thing because we're going through it. I mean, but the effects, the negative effects of it, is all future based. It's very surprising to see that they were not involved earlier, because the policy makers are living in the now. They're doing it for the now.
Of course.
So it's, to be honest with you, it's a kind of a, from my side, it seems like the government's like, listen, this is a future thing. So we really need to involve the guys who are going to be affected more to be part of this. And it is very surprising it was not done. So there were 27 COPs before this one, and none of them took that initiative. So, and this is kind of compliment. So because the youth agenda has been on for a long time. We were the first country who has youth ministers. We're the first country who have youth initiatives, youth councils kind of spread across the board. And to be honest with you, it is something that...
Shout out to Du's Youth Council. They've been doing amazing, honestly. Go on.
And thank you. Thank you. I think this goes for the leadership also. That kind of have that direction. So back to the point of the COP28 and kind of the... how does it build? Yeah, because you told me there is like green zones and blue zones when we're talking about. Can you just tell us a little bit about it? What is so different? Why should we know what is COP28? So the general listeners, how are they going to be involved? in this, yeah, because we're having this huge conference.
Mm-hmm.
What's the role of myself, the guys who are going to be, can we go and attend something like, I don't know, Gitix or Expo or?
Well, it's let's break this down, right?
Yes.
Let's take it step by step to make sure that everyone really benefits from this really good question that you have just asked. So let's start off with a comparison of Expo and COP. So COP versus Expo. With Expo, it's the world showcasing their technologies and their investments for the future. People come from all around the world to see it, right? But COP is where the future is being discussed. So COP is where a lot of your future is being formulated. Whereas Expo, this is where you can see a glimpse. You showcase.
One is a showcase and one is a
more of a
decision
making platform.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And then we move on to the second aspect of how can viewers engage. But before we do that, let's really understand or distinguish the difference between the blue zones and the green zones. So the blue zones are mainly for people who are permitted or given access to by the UN. Because the blue zones will be mandated by the UNFCCC, which is the framework for climate change.
UNFCCC.
I
don't know what the second number. United Nations, UN.
United Nations Framework for Climate Change Conventions.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And it's going to be really hard to access, which is why the green zones exist, where general public like me and you can engage. And there's a reason for that, because when you have a lot of your youth-led initiatives be in the green zones, which are very close, by the way, this is unprecedented. Like, it usually is not the case, where the blue zones is very segregated from the green zone. So they're completely two different venues, but not this time. This time, they're very close, and there is a reason for that. Because the UAE believes that, for them to be accessible, the green zones being accessible by governments, decision makers, and people who belong usually in the blue zones, then it's an opportunity for the youth to showcase their hard work and channel their voices in such platforms. Them being so close is an opportunity for both the governments to engage with the youth and the youth to make sure their voices are heard. So there is a very specific reason the UAE has done this. Another thing is, this is where the youth come in or engage. There is the 100 Mentors program taking place in the youth pavilion. Yeah, we're going to have a youth hub stationed in Expo City that the youth can access. It is accessible. Yeah, it is accessible. I'm not sure about the logistics of how you get in. It might be a QR code. But there are things that the youth can engage in. So you're going to see also projects that are done by the youth. And just FYI, done by the youth is just not mean that the owner or the entrepreneur is a youth, but he's also well aware of the requirements to operate a sustainable business or a venture. And you will also engage in youth debates, which are not just debates with your local youth, but also international delegates. So youth that come from all over the world, they're going to engage. And this is an opportunity for the Emirati youth specifically to showcase just how bright our minds are. I encourage the youth of the UAE to really engage, because the ideas and the thoughts that they have, when very well said, they're life-changing. And honestly, I'm not saying this as a person who's biased, but it's more of a person who's been inspired by the youth I was surrounded with. And then there's also youth circles, which is a channel for the youth to access or speak with decision makers, high-level decision makers, not just from the UAE, but all around the world. So this is a place where you could ask them questions as well as give them feedback. But the issue is, even with wind and solar and geothermal, these are not entirely consistent.
Why?
Because sometimes you have dust in the air, right? That blocks sun and that lowers the efficiency of the solar panels.
Lowers it or eliminates it?
It does not eliminate it, it just lowers the efficiency, which is already pretty low. So the solar panels are not that efficient. They're not there. They do not extract 100% of the energy they receive. They they have a certain percentage, right?
So, well, this is a problem because it's very dusty.
It is.
Especially in, like, people always say UAE has a lot of sun. You should only use solar. But now that you say this, it makes sense that I mean, we have mega projects that are generating 2, 3, I think 1 to 2 gigawatts of energy, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah,
Shams 1, Shams 2, Mohammed bin Rashid's
it's
solar farm,
park. Yeah, solar park.
solar
Yeah.
park.
But another thing that you need to look into, these solar panels, they take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
You
These are
cannot
huge.
have them. I mean, aesthetically said, you can use them to replace, for example, like buildings, glass pane, windows, and it might look as decent enough. So you're making more use of the glass panes that you have, whether in your home, if you use them as rooftop tiles, or whether you use them as glass for buildings, it might work, right? But with wind, you have these really long structures that are very hard to not only construct, but also to place multiple off in one specific area.
So where is the effort right now going? Is it going towards, improve the solar absorption, improve reliance on wind? And I think geothermal is actually one of the most reliable ones.
It is.
Correct
But
me if
it
I'm
really
wrong.
depends on the
I mean,
geo
we don't have it here because we don't have
Mhm.
like the volcanic kind of atmosphere, I think. So maybe for
environment.
our
Yeah.
listeners, you can maybe a little bit elaborate on the geothermal.
Well, for geothermals, it really depends so much on your geographic location, the environment, how the different tectonic plates or the plates at which the Earth operates with. Well, about your question about where the effort is currently at, really, I cannot answer that because different companies or different governments are going through what they believe is most reliable or relevant to them. And COP is one of those places where we will get a more clear answer of where the money is going to go towards. A solution that is not specific for one country, but it's something that will apply to so many different countries.
So solar has been there for a long time, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
As I remember, since we were kids, we had the calculators, we had the solar thing. So I assume it's there at least since, I don't know, maybe the 80s, maybe before.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the latest innovation? What was the latest one when it comes to sustainability? It seems like a long time we've come up with the internet. We came up with AI now is taking over.
Mm-hmm.
Soon, we will not be needing to think even at some point. Once AI takes over. But it seems like not much innovation happens in the field of sustainability. If we're talking about solar, wind, and geothermal, and we've been talking about this for 50 plus years, maybe.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, all this effort in zero innovation, is it just because it's difficult, or is it just, we're spending our money elsewhere?
You could say
Just,
it's a
just give me your
combination of
opinion on
both.
the manner, on
Yeah,
the matter. Yeah, just
definitely.
your opinion.
This is a opinion. I think it's a combination of both. Our money is definitely going elsewhere, and you also have the fact that it's not so easy to come up with innovation in that field. You're very limited with the sort of knowledge that we currently have, and to get there, we definitely need to have a more funded or intense research to really reach somewhere. Our money is going to other aspects, right? We cannot put all our money into this research specifically
That's
because there's always
We
that.
still need to live.
Yeah, for sure. And there's also the chance if it not really working out, or you might invest so much into something, but something else that's more useful comes out, right? There's always that fear that stops not only companies but governments also from fully investing in one specific area. So what they do is they do a very general distribution across the line on different researches that exist, researches
Mhm.
that exist regarding sources of energy and how we can make them more efficient currently. Also, we need to understand that different places around the world are facing different crises. energy might not be their main priority, hence they cannot invest that much. So for countries where the cost of living is already too high, or maybe they have an issue with water sanitation and the overall hygiene of the food, they're having like a food security issue, then that is why we cannot completely dedicate our funds to one specific problem, right?
Do you think there is not enough money in the sustainability? Like you don't get your return of investment really in cash? Because if I invent an AI, yeah, people's gonna buy into this. I can utilize it to commercialize it very quickly. I have very quick return on investment. Whereas, if I spend X amount of time developing a solar panel,
Hmm.
really how many people are gonna buy that?
I mean,
How many people are eligible? If I cannot really sell it in countries where it rains a lot. They
right.
barely get any sun.
Will you send like a wind farm for a country that does not have wind?
Exactly. So maybe do you think that's a reason? I can't really get my return on investment, in cash. So
I
the
mean,
private sector is not as involved. This is purely from what I see, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like governments are taking the blunt of the kind of responsibility. And how much can you fund as a government, where the
Very true.
private sector is not really contributing?
Yeah.
And I'm talking about this generically because
Yeah, yeah. Which
uh,
makes a lot of sense,
yeah,
by the
here
way.
in the UAE it's a bit different because everyone works as a team. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen some of our towers here that are covered in solar panels. So our towers actually, and don't quote me on this, but I believe they generate energy to reduce the amount of energy that they utilize, and at some point you can actually push back to the grid when
That's
they
very
generate
interesting.
back.
Yeah.
And I need the technical team verification on this specifically. But in other countries, yeah, this is just private sector reliant. If you look at countries like Europe, I don't want to name any specific countries in the West in general or the East in general. The private sector is pretty much dominant, and if it's not, and the private sector works for profits.
Right.
So all their initiatives,
They're running a business in the end of the day,
Yeah,
not a charity.
yeah.
Yeah.
and then this is where the governments kind of come in and is like taking the blunt of the down. So all the investments that are being done on R&D for this company. So if I'm an energy company in the West, and I want to, I do the kind of R&D on sustainability, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I get a tax break, because I can save some money, because I can make some money. The government actually contributes and funds it. It funds my research to some extent. And all these programs, I think, started fairly late. I think only after the Paris Agreement, which is 6 years ago or 7 years ago.
So in 2015, when the Paris Agreement was
Mm.
signed, this is where we started to see more of electric vehicles,
Yeah.
the utilization of paper bags, and so many changes that we have noticed, right? And this goes to show you how significant COP is. But then again, we need to understand certain element, right? Which is governments are not gonna fund an energy company that gives them cleaner energy, but it's more expensive, right? Because you have an issue of cost of living, and you do not want to
Increase
make
that
that.
significantly.
Yeah.
I
You
understand.
do
Yeah.
not want to increase the scale of which people are suffering or struggling with the cost of living. You do not want to make this issue more complicated by reducing or solving another issue. You want to solve both of them, right? So it's not to say that we do not have any breakthroughs, we do not have any sort of tangible technological advancements, but it's more of, let's just say, none that is very relevant at this point. So it's hard to say that there's nothing, but it's also fair to say that we are waiting for the breakthrough. We are waiting for a clean energy that is not only clean and environmentally friendly and sustainable, but it's also cheaper for people to afford. You want to make sure that when you are able to provide a solution, it's an inclusive solution that targets all issues from the root causes. You do not want to create a new issue by solving a current issue.
Any last thoughts you want to share?
My last thoughts would be that, being environmentally friendly doesn't mean, or being environmentally conscious does not mean you should undermine or belittle your friends that do not follow suit.
I should change my behavior then.
Well, with you, with the way you described your friend, I would advise you not to. But for other people, some people are being completely anti-environmental, anti-climate, because they've been approached by people who feel that just because they are taking, like, let's say, for example, they drive a Tesla. Oh my God, you are someone who contributes to pollution and climate change because you're driving a non-EV vehicle. I drive a vehicle that is completely electric. I drive a Tesla. Therefore, I'm like a hero of the environment. But that's not really the case. It's nice for you to push for it. It's nice for you to recommend it to your friends, but you definitely never need to enforce people to do things that you do just because you think it's right. And in this field, we need least amount of enemies as possible. We do get attacked quite enough by people willing to sponsor our research. So let's not make more enemies out there. Let's be more considerate of people. Let's approach people who think differently in a different way rather than just saying you should do this because this is right. But instead, try to approach it from a different perspective and try to see it from his eyes or her eyes. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for having me today. And thank you once again, Do Youth Council, for this amazing initiative. I'm looking forward to hearing not only my podcast, but the upcoming ones for sure.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And inshallah, we'll be in touch with you soon. We're definitely going to be visiting you and the rest of the team at COP28, the Green area.
Inshallah, I'm looking forward.
Thank you very much. This concludes the podcast. Please remember to follow our page to get more engaged and better well connected.